Step out. Step out. Keep your hands up. Step out. Turn around. Turn around. Turn around. Face away from me. Face away from me. Tanner? Yes, sir. Okay.
You have rights to remain silent if you state any statement you make will be used against you in court. You have rights to an attorney, and you have the right to have an attorney present. You can't afford an attorney when you appointed to you. Do you understand your rights?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you have the right to terminate this interview at any time. You understand your rights?
What was the last part?
You have the right to terminate this interview at any time.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Horner, if you'd stand, please. It's the order of the court that you, Tanner Lynn Horner, has been adjudged to be guilty of the offense of capital murder as found by the jury. Jury having answered the special issues making it mandatory that your punishment be death, it is therefore the order of this court that your punishment be death. Before the hour of sunrise on a date to be determined by this court, upon a mandate of affirmance issued by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals at the State Penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas, you will be caused to die in accordance with the rules and regulations established by the Texas Department of Criminal Justice until you, said Tanner Horner, are dead. Said execution procedure shall be determined and supervised by the Director of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. The clerk of this court shall issue a death warrant in accordance with this sentence directed to the Director of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for that purpose.
During a police interrogation in December 2022, Tanner Horner told investigators that he had made a mistake. He said it was an accident. He said he panicked. He said that a 7-year-old girl named Athena Strand had walked behind his delivery van as he was pulling out of the driveway, and that everything that followed was a reaction he hadn't planned, a decision made in fear, a series of terrible choices that spiraled beyond his control. Investigators listened. Then they reviewed what the van had actually recorded, and the story Tanner Horner told began to fall apart. Not gradually, not partially, but piece by piece, detail by detail, until almost nothing he had said remained standing. This is the case of Athena Strand. This is morbid true crime. Detailed documentary investigations focused on criminal psychology, forensic evidence, and procedural analysis.
On Tuesday, December 6th of 2022, I was allowed to see Athena for the first time. I went in about an hour before I'd actually told Jacob to show up because I didn't know what she would look like and I didn't know how bad it would be. And I didn't want him to see our daughter like that. So I went in around 8 in the morning with just my dad. And her ears were messed up. And she had incision lines. And her chin was scraped up. And so we put her in a hospital gown because I didn't have clothes for her. And she was naked. And I searched her body looking for any reason that that wasn't my baby. And then we did her makeup so Jacob wouldn't have to see the discoloration and how bad it was.
When investigators first approached Tanner Lynn Horner on December 2nd, 2022, he didn't wait to be asked many questions. He volunteered information almost immediately. He said he had been making deliveries in Paradise, Texas, 2 days earlier, on the afternoon of November 30th, when he accidentally struck a young girl with his vehicle while backing out of a driveway. He said she didn't appear seriously injured. He said he panicked. He said he placed her inside the van because he didn't know what else to do. He said he was afraid of losing his job. He said things escalated from there. On the surface, this account might have read as the confession of a man overwhelmed by a catastrophic mistake. Someone who had made a terrible decision in a moment of fear and was now attempting to come to terms with it. But investigators had already been working the case for 2 days by that point, and several things Horner described didn't line up with what they had already begun to piece together. The timeline didn't align, the physical evidence didn't support it, and the behavior documented in the hours immediately following the incident, captured in part by Horner's own delivery van, contradicted the emotional portrait of a man in crisis. Investigators continued questioning him. What followed was one of the more psychologically complex interrogations documented in this case. Before going further into the investigation, it is important to establish who Athena Strand was. Not as a victim in the abstract, but as a specific child living a specific life in a small Texas town. Athena Presley Monroe Strand was born on May 23, 2015. She was 7 years old. She lived with her father, Jacob Strand, and her stepmother, Ashley Strand, in Paradise, Texas, a rural community in Wise County, northwest of Fort Worth. Open land, the kind of place where children ran outside freely, where a package left at the door wasn't unusual, where nothing in the surrounding landscape suggested anything other than ordinary life. By all documented accounts, Athena was a child full of energy and spirit. Ashley Strand later described her in court as wild, not in a troubled sense, but in the way of a child completely at home in open space, always moving, always finding something to climb or chase or explore. She had a favorite tree on the property, a fruitless pear tree near the house. She and her sister used to climb it, hang from its branches, spend hours in it the way children do when they have space and time and no reason to be anywhere else.
She was wild. She loved living out there. Loved just, the freedom of, being a kid.
Athena loved everything. She loved life. We liked to watch movies together. It was very common for us to have movie nights, popcorn and candy. It was very common for her to want to ride her horse with her Aunt Kate. It was very common for her to want to do anything outdoors with her father, so long as her father was around. She watched him butcher animals. She watched him clear property. As long as Daddy was around, she was great with being dirty and being outside.
Her mother, Maitland Gandy, lived in Oklahoma. Athena split time between her parents. On November 30th, 2022, Maitland had dropped Athena off at her father's house. A quick handoff, the kind of ordinary transition that happens between separated parents dozens of times a year without consequence. Before she drove away, Maitland told Athena she loved her. She said she'd see her on Friday. It was a brief goodbye, unremarkable in the way that most goodbyes are, the kind you don't think about afterward because there's no reason to. Maitland Gandy didn't know it was the last time she would see her daughter alive.
You remember the last thing you said to Athena?
I told her that I loved her and that I would see her on Friday. We had a quick drop-off because her daddy was going to take them to the Christmas lights that night. So it's not the goodbye that I would have wanted.
A FedEx delivery van arrived at the Strand property. The driver was Tanner Lynn Horner, 31 years old, employed as a contracted delivery driver through a company called Big Topspin, which operated under FedEx's delivery network in that region. The package he delivered that day was a Christmas gift. It was addressed to Ashley Strand. Inside were Barbie dolls, purchased for Athena, meant to be wrapped and placed under a tree weeks later. Horner left the package near an abandoned trailer on the property and pulled out of the driveway. Athena Strand was somewhere on that property when he arrived. She was not inside the house. What happened in the minutes immediately following the delivery became the central question of the entire investigation, and later, the central conflict at trial. According to Horner's initial account to investigators, the events that followed were accidental. A child he hadn't seen. A van he was already moving. What the van's own recording equipment would later show told a different story entirely. Athena was reported missing later that same afternoon. Athena Strand initially assumed the child was hiding, the kind of thought any parent or step-parent might have when a child goes quiet on a large rural property. Athena knew every corner of that land, the tree, the trailer, the open fields. But she wasn't hiding. Search efforts began quickly. The disappearance of a 7-year-old in a rural area escalated response times. Law enforcement, volunteers, aerial support. The community mobilized. What investigators didn't yet know, in those early hours, was that Athena had already been placed inside a delivery van. They didn't know who had taken her. They didn't know where she was. They didn't know in those first hours that she was already gone. Athena's mother, Maitland Gandy, drove from Oklahoma to North Texas when she heard her daughter was missing. She later described the drive as a physical struggle, an inability to breathe properly, a body responding to something the mind wasn't ready to accept. She arrived not knowing what she would find. For 2 days, investigators worked the case. The break in the investigation came through the delivery records. Detectives working the case determined that a FedEx package had been delivered to the Strand property during the precise window when Athena disappeared. That detail, the timing of the delivery against the timing of the disappearance, became an immediate investigative focus. Working with FedEx and its contractor Big Topston, investigators were able to identify the specific driver assigned to that route and that delivery. His name was Tanner Lynn Horner. They were also able to obtain footage from inside the delivery van. What that footage showed was significant. A still image captured from the van's internal camera showed a young girl, later confirmed to be Athena Strand, inside the vehicle with Horner. She appeared uninjured in the image. She appeared to be talking. That image became one of the most important pieces of evidence in the case, not only because it confirmed that Athena had been inside the van, but because of what it contradicted in Horner's later account about her condition and the nature of the encounter. When investigators approached Horner for questioning, he did not deny being at the property. He did not deny that a child had been in his van. He began instead to explain. The interrogation of Tanner Horner is one of the more psychologically layered, documented interviews in this case. Horner was questioned by investigators including Texas Ranger Sergeant Job Espinoza. Over the course of those sessions, Horner's behavior shifted in ways that investigators found notable, not simply in what he said, but in how he said it, and the manner in which his account changed depending on what evidence was introduced. His initial explanation centered on the accident narrative. He struck the child accidentally. She wasn't seriously hurt. He made decisions that compounded the situation until there was no way out. He framed the entire sequence as a collapse, a man who made one wrong decision and then couldn't stop the consequences. Investigators documented the account. Then they began introducing evidence. As the interrogation progressed, Horner's responses became more complex. At one point during questioning, Sergeant Espinoza testified that Horner referenced an alternate identity, a persona he called Zero.
How long have we been talking to you, Zero? The whole time? When did you take over?
When he addressed me as such.
So when we were in the building earlier, was Tanner talking to us?
So if I'd addressed you as Zero from the get-go, you would have talked to him? Oh, that's only respectful. I apologize for not referring to you as Zero sooner, but it clicked to me. Tanner, you've been talking. I need to talk to Zero. Thank you for talking.
According to Espinoza's courtroom testimony, when discussing certain aspects of the case, Horner's physical demeanor changed. His posture shifted, his head tilted, his eyes moved in a way that Espinoza described as a performed transition, as though Horner was indicating he was no longer speaking as himself, but as this other identity. His physical demeanor changes. Espinoza testified, his head goes into a sideways motion, his eyes roll into the back of the head, and he pretends to turn it to zero. Investigators treated this behavioral presentation with procedural caution. The existence of an alternate identity was neither confirmed nor dismissed as a clinical matter. But the timing of its appearance during interrogation, specifically at moments when Horner was being pressed about the most serious details of the case, was something investigators observed and documented carefully. At another point in the interrogation process, Horner made a request. He asked to be released from custody for 1 month. He said he wanted to spend one final holiday season with his family before facing what was coming. The request was denied. The accident narrative Horner offered investigators carried a particular logic on its surface. Accidents happen. Panic is a documented human response to crisis. The idea that a sequence of bad decisions could escalate beyond a person's control is not inherently implausible. But the evidence that investigators were assembling in parallel with that interrogation created significant problems for the account. The first problem was the prosecutor's presentation of what Horner had said when Athena was first placed in the van. Wise County District Attorney James Stainton, in his opening statements at trial, told jurors that the first words Horner directed at Athena, documented from the van's recording, were not the words of someone managing an accidental injury. "Don't scream or I'll hurt you." He said it twice. That phrase, spoken before any escalation, before any decision about what to do next, did not align with the portrait of a panicked man improvising in the aftermath of an accident. It aligned with something else, something more deliberate. The second problem was the van's audio recording. Horner had covered the van's internal camera at some point during the events of that afternoon. The visual record was interrupted, but the microphone continued to run. Over approximately 1 hour of audio, investigators documented what occurred inside that vehicle. The content of that recording was played for jurors during the trial. Multiple jurors were visibly affected by what they heard. Reports indicated some were sobbing. Among the documented audio, Athena's voice, her screams, and at one point Horner's voice telling her, "If you don't shut up, I will hurt you worse." The third problem was what Horner did after. Court documents and trial testimony reconstructed Horner's movements in the hours following Athena Strand's death with considerable specificity. After the events inside the van, Horner drove to a gas station. He cleaned the interior of the delivery vehicle. He then drove to the FedEx facility. He called dispatch. He requested the same truck for the following day's deliveries. The behavior documented in those hours, the methodical cleaning, the return to the facility, the request to continue his route the next morning, was analyzed during the trial as part of the prosecution's broader argument that Horner's actions reflected deliberate concealment rather than the fractured behavior of someone overwhelmed by an accidental tragedy. The following morning, Horner searched for Athena Strand online. He looked at images of her. He searched for her missing poster. He searched for crime scene photographs. He also searched a specific question: whether FedEx delivery van cameras record continuously. That search, conducted the day after her death, while a community was mobilizing to find a missing child, was presented at trial as one of the more significant documented behavioral indicators of Horner's state of mind in the immediate aftermath. Meanwhile, the search for Athena continued. 2 days after she was reported missing, investigators found her body near a creek southeast of Boyd, Texas. Approximately 9 miles from her home in Paradise, Horner led law enforcement to that location. FBI agent Dave Rogers, who was present at the recovery, later testified about what he observed when Athena was pulled from the water. "I remember her being really cold to the touch," he said. "With the lights and everything on the skin, her skin appeared to be glistening, kind of angel-like." The medical examination conducted following the recovery of Athena's body was central to the prosecution's case. Dr. Jessica Dwyer, the medical examiner who performed the autopsy, testified that Athena Strand died as a result of blunt force injuries combined with smothering and strangulation. When asked directly whether the child had suffered, Dr. Dwyer answered simply, "Yes," she said. "I think she did." Forensic analysts also processed biological evidence recovered from both Athena and from Horner's FedEx uniform. DNA testing was conducted at the Texas Department of Public Safety Laboratory. YSTR testing, a method that specifically targets male DNA, was applied to samples recovered from Athena. The results indicated that Tanner Horner could not be excluded as a contributor to those samples. Horner denied any assault beyond what he had described to investigators. The DNA evidence was presented at trial without a definitive classification. It established possibility rather than certainty under the testing methodology used, but combined with other forensic and digital evidence, it formed part of the prosecution's broader argument about the nature and scope of what occurred inside that van. The evidence, taken together, was what District Attorney James Stanton would later characterize in his closing arguments as among the most serious his office had ever prosecuted. On December 5, 2022, 5 days after Athena's disappearance, Tanner Horner was formally charged with aggravated kidnapping and capital murder of a child under the age of 10. Later that same month, on December 22nd, prosecutors filed 3 additional charges against Horner, counts of sexual assault of a minor related to 3 separate incidents alleged to have occurred in 2013. Those charges involved separate individuals and were unrelated to the Strand case, but were introduced during the trial's sentencing phase as part of the prosecution's argument about Horner's history and future risk. In February 2023, a Wise County grand jury formally indicted Horner on the kidnapping and capital murder charges. District Attorney James Stanton announced shortly after that the state would seek the death penalty. Horner initially entered a not guilty plea in March 2023. The case moved through the pretrial system over the following years. The trial was scheduled to begin in Tarrant County. A change of venue had been granted in April 2026. On the morning of April 7, 2026, as jurors were being seated and the court prepared to move into the guilt phase of the proceedings, Tanner Horner changed his plea. He pleaded guilty to capital murder and aggravated kidnapping. The trial moved immediately into the sentencing phase. Jurors were no longer being asked whether Horner had done it. They were being asked what should happen to him next. The sentencing phase of the trial lasted nearly a full month. Prosecutors built their case around 2 arguments: that what Horner did to Athena Strand was planned, and that he remained a future danger if allowed to live. In his opening remarks, Stanton told jurors that Horner had told, in his words, lie upon lie upon lie upon lie throughout the investigation. That the accident narrative, the panic explanation, the suggestion that things simply spiraled, none of it was consistent with what the evidence actually showed. Investigators testified about the van audio, about the deliberate covering of the camera, about the search history, about Horner's calm return to the FedEx facility and his request for the same vehicle the following morning. Testimony also addressed Horner's documented tendency to engage in fantasy, specifically violent fantasy. Prosecutors argued this behavioral pattern extended to the crime itself, and that the abduction of Athena Strand was not an impulsive reaction to an accident, but something Horner had mentally rehearsed. 2 women testified about separate alleged incidents from 2013, one describing assault when she was 16, another describing a similar incident in 2014. Both testimonies were introduced as part of the prosecution's argument that Horner had a documented history of behavior that predated and contextualized the Strand case. The prosecution rested after presenting the audio recording from inside the van on April 16, 2026. The sound of Athena's screams, captured by a microphone Horner had not thought to disable, was heard by every person in that courtroom. The defense did not dispute what Horner had done. After the guilty plea, the only question before the jury was whether mitigating factors, aspects of Horner's background, neurology, and developmental history were sufficient to argue for life imprisonment rather than execution. Horner's attorney, Stephen Goebel, acknowledged in his opening remarks that the evidence against his client was overwhelming and terrible. He did not minimize it. What he asked the jury to consider was who Tanner Horner was before November 30, 2022, or more precisely, what had shaped him. Multiple defense experts testified about Horner's background. He had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. He had been exposed to significant levels of lead during childhood, a factor that multiple medical professionals testified can affect neurological development and behavioral regulation. His mother had consumed alcohol during pregnancy. Dr. Jolie Brams, a clinical and forensic psychologist, testified about how developmental disorders intersect with behavior and life outcomes, and how Horner's full background, including his family environment, his upbringing, and his neurological profile, was relevant to understanding how he functioned. Horner's family testified about his childhood. A difficult early life was described: instability, exposure to substances, the lasting effects of a home environment that did not provide consistent structure or safety. The defense's argument was not that Horner's background excused what he had done. It was that the jury had not been shown evidence sufficient to prove he would remain a danger inside a prison setting, and that mitigating factors, taken together, justified a sentence of life without parole, rather than death. The defense rested on May 4, 2026. The jury deliberated. On May 5, 2026, they returned with their recommendation: death. The recommendation was unanimous. Judge George Gallagher formally imposed the sentence in accordance with the jury's finding. Jurors determined that Tanner Horner posed a continuing threat to society. They found that nothing in the commission of the crime and nothing in Horner's background was sufficient to warrant a sentence of life without parole in place of execution. Horner did not visibly react when the sentence was read. Within days of the sentencing, his defense filed an appeal with the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, the state's highest criminal court. Under Texas law, a death sentence is automatically subject to review. The appeals process will involve a direct review of the trial record and may later include habeas corpus proceedings where new evidence and testimony can be introduced. The case, in that legal sense, is not fully closed. There are aspects of this case that no courtroom testimony fully resolved. The question of what Horner's precise intentions were when he arrived at the Strand property that afternoon, whether the encounter was opportunistic or something he had contemplated in advance, was argued by both sides without a definitive documented answer. Prosecutors presented behavioral evidence suggesting deliberateness. The defense characterized the crime differently. The jury made its determination based on the totality of what was presented. But outside the courtroom, the case has continued to affect people in ways that legal proceedings don't fully capture. Athena's father, Jacob Strand, testified during the sentencing phase about what life has looked like since his daughter's death. He still lives on the same property in Paradise. He still walks past the fruitless pear tree she used to climb, the one she shared with her sister, where she would hang from the branches and simply exist in the uncomplicated way that 7-year-olds do when they feel safe and loved and unhurried. He said he goes to that tree to talk to her. Athena's mother, Maitland Gandy, attended every single court hearing related to the case. She wore pink to the trial, Athena's favorite color. She testified about her daughter's playfulness, her happiness, the specific texture of ordinary life, with a child who filled space with sound and motion and presence. She also, at some point after the case drew national attention, posted publicly about something that had compounded her grief in a way that few people outside her position would easily understand. In her post, she wrote directly to the public. She said she was begging, her word, for people to stop tagging her in images of Tanner Horner. Specifically, she referenced a still image from inside the van, the footage that captured the last documented moments of Athena's life. She wrote that the image lives in her head already, that she has been looking at Horner's face for nearly 3 years, that she knows exactly what he looks like, whether he loses weight or gains it, whether he changes his appearance or doesn't, that none of the people tagging her had meant to cause harm, but that the harm arrived regardless, every single time. The post did not ask for outrage or response. It asked simply to be left alone with a grief that was already carrying more than it could hold. The case generated significant public reaction in the weeks surrounding the trial. Figures including public commentators, social media users, and prominent voices across various platforms weighed in on Horner's guilt, on the evidence, on the sentence. Elon Musk commented publicly on the outcome. The case briefly saturated national conversation in the way that certain crimes do when they intersect with enough documented horror and enough unanswered questions about how something like this happens at all. But public attention is not the same as understanding. And understanding, the kind that comes from reconstructing what actually occurred, from following the evidence rather than the reaction, is what this case ultimately requires. What investigators ultimately documented in this case was not a single impulsive act. It was a sequence of decisions, before, during, and after, each of which was captured in some form by the evidence. A camera that was covered, a microphone that kept running, a gas station stop, a truck request for the following morning, A search history reviewed the next day, and a story offered to investigators almost immediately that the evidence dismantled piece by piece. Tanner Horner was sentenced to death on May 5, 2026. An appeal has been filed. Athena Strand was 7 years old. Her mother told her she loved her. She said she'd see her on Friday. This has been morbid true crime, where documented evidence, investigative procedure, and behavioral analysis come together to reconstruct complex cases. If this documentary was meaningful to you, subscribing helps this channel continue producing investigations like this one.